dividends. Now you have some countries basically limiting some of these multinationals to maybe a 40-50% of the profits that they actually end up making. And that can become a bit of a challenge for some of the multinationals. We've seen some of them along the way even pull out of certain markets because they feel that maybe, the regulations may be a bit unfavorable from their overall group perspective in terms of how they view things, yeah? So, the tax environment, recently in Uganda, we did have what we call the UBO, the ultimate beneficiary owner, because we were on the gray list, right? So you have some multinationals who are being asked to, come on, do this filing, tell us who the final UBO is. And, to delayer some of these organizations all the way to that very last person was a bit of a challenge for some of them, to literally, this might not be possible, but we did see that as, something that impacted them. So again, that's regulatory framework. I think the other, which is also very, very critical, and as companies, one of the things we actually advise our clients as they try to venture into new markets, everything really starts with also the people, the culture, okay? Because when you're going into a new territory, it looks like, from where you're standing, I may be a Ugandan business and everything is great in this environment. Now I want to venture into a new nation and it looks like it's easy peasy, right? But things like culture, even something as basic as language, can be of a great challenge to a multinational. I recently went into Lubumbashi, and just from the airport, I had a bit of a rough patch. I needed an interpreter, and I was trying to remember all the French I had learnt in my high school and why I did not pay attention in class. But things even as small as that, just trying to understand how they do business. There are some cultures where you can close a transaction virtually. You don't really need to meet each other. There are some cultures where you have to actually be present. It starts with the trust. Maybe you do dinner first before we actually close a transaction. So just really understanding the cultures and the customs of where we are. Looking at Uganda, we do have a large project that's happening with the pipeline. One of the things that's being done is the compensation of people. So you have to be able to understand how they think, how they do, I was having a conversation earlier about, people who are shifting even graveyards. In an African context, that's not an easy thing to pull off. So you have to be able to understand that. So I think for entities like that, again, having the right advisors so that, as you go into a new market, you're fully advised on the different regulations, how people do business from a cultural perspective before you even venture in, is very, very critical. Of course, the geopolitical factors. We also starting even just with the COVID, we saw what it did to the supply chains. Yeah, it really changed how goods were moving. It changed how people were moving. But it did bring, there were some good things there as well, because many times we all thought that to have a meeting, I actually have to be physically present. But that also did teach us a few things that, we can actually have different ways of working. The human capital aspect, working from home was unheard of. Now you have a bit of a hybrid and a mix of that's happening. Political stability is also very, very critical. We've seen territories where by the time the multinational is venturing in, everything is well, there's stability, and you can never underestimate a peaceful environment. Yeah, I think that's one of the things as Uganda we really have to tap ourselves on the back for. Honestly, you cannot underestimate stability, because it's what really drives everything else, right? So you have markets where you have a bit of that, you have some unrest, and then you have a multinational having to think about, how do I take care of my people? How do I take care of the business? How do I ensure that I don't have people raiding one of my operations in the middle of the night? Yeah, so I think those are. I'll leave it at that in terms of some of the key challenges that we've found for the multinationals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ramla. That was quite fascinating. And I want to get back to you in just a few seconds, or rather minutes, but you mentioned something that I think I want to take to Trevor. You talked about some of the regulatory challenges, Ramla, that MNCs are facing. You talked about the beneficial ownership regimes now, MNCs being required to forfeit some of their profits. And I want to take that to Trevor because I know they do a lot of tax work with MNCs as an organization. And over the last decade, I imagine there's been a lot of discussion around international taxation and a lot of the aggressive tax planning that MNCs engage in. They're accused of artificial profit shifting, and there's been tax justice movements against them. As an advisor, what are some of the strategies that you've employed in advising your clients to deal with, one, the reputational risks that come with the sort of business that they're engaged in? It's not illegal tax planning, but there's been a lot of pushback against aggressive tax planning.
Both private and public. The delay is based on
Thank you very much. Good evening to you all. My name, as earlier introduced, I'm Trevor Lukanga Bwanika. I'm an associate director at PwC, and I look after tax. And yes, like you've mentioned, I do a lot of international tax. So, like Ramla has mentioned, so when you look at it, for most of these multinationals, Ramla has mentioned language, culture, but what we see when you're interacting with most of the MNEs is that they get a lot of value when you give them local perspective, because someone comes from the US, someone comes from South Africa, they believe the way the tax law works in South Africa should pretty much be the same way it works in Uganda. When you come on the ground, you find that things are very, very different. The interpretation is different, the practice is different. So most of the value add that they get is the insights that you give them. So, and I can give an example. When it comes to using tax treaties, it's very easy to talk about, go to Mauritius, go to the UK, wherever it is, you structure your transaction from there. But once that is done, then you've got to get the money out from Uganda. You've got to go to KCB to then give them an instruction to take the money out. So what happens is that after doing all those nice fancy structures, then you come down here, then it could be, the URA could easily just tell you that the treaty does not apply. So in terms of trying to help them get local understanding, get local perspective, is because us as practitioners, us as professionals, we know what the URA do, or we know what all these compliance authorities do. So we try to give them perspective over and above what you easily read from your tax law. And we found that they get more value out of that. Then to your point around them multinationals taking profits out of Uganda and all those things, I think the previous panel was talking about transfer pricing. That has become a very big issue in terms of how you structure the transactions. And it's not that it is bad, but then you've got to do it in such a manner that then complies with the local tax authorities and what the regulations provide for. So our advice, our first point of call is always to tell them, you don't need to be aggressive, because once you're aggressive, then, like you said, it's going to impact your reputation. You can imagine what if you woke up tomorrow and one of the multinationals is in the papers with a tax bill of 1 trillion shillings or whatever it is. So the advice really is to tell them, even when you're aggressive, you're going to be caught out by the URA. So you had better do the right thing. One of the things that we are seeing now is trying to get, especially from a transfer pricing perspective, one of the things that is available is what is called an advance pricing agreement. So basically, you agree with the tax authority as to how you're going to structure the transactions. And that then gives you some certainty, say over a 4-year period or something. So that really helps, because once you get once you get approval from the tax authority, then at least you know you're comfortable in terms of what your transactions are going to look like going forward. So the big take out of this is that if you're coming into the country, then one, you, like Ramla said, understand the culture, get the local perspective. Then two, make sure if you're not certain, exhaust all alternatives that are provided to you in terms of the either tax legislation or whichever compliance compliance regulation that it could be, because quite often there are often avenues that can be used in order for you to structure your transaction in a compliant manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. That's quite fascinating. But if I may just play devil's advocate a bit for the MNCs, I think back in 2019, Dan Ngabirano wrote an article about Uganda's tax regime and talked about how it was a little too overly aggressive towards MNCs, especially in the IOCs, the international oil companies. And our colleagues in Ghana discovered oil in 2006. Shortly 2 years after they got to final investment decision, it took us over a decade to get to final investment decision. Between then, there was a lot, between the 10 years, there was a lot of tax disputes, Heritage trying to sell their stake to Talo, and then Talo trying to sell its stake to Total. There were a lot of tax disputes that were there. One of the main issues was the inconsistencies in the interpretation of our tax codes. Would you say that we could do better as African countries to create regulatory frameworks, for instance, in tax that are more consistent and give a bit of certainty to multinational companies getting in?
Yeah, and you see, you make a very good point, because where we are coming from and where we are now is different. So at that time, for example, when you're talking about the heritage and all, so you found that government would give incentives based on the petroleum sharing agreements. Yet, in terms of the tax law, the administration is based on the Income Tax Act. So the conflict would always be, do you want to give it as per the PSA, which is the Petroleum Sharing Agreement, or you want to provide for it in the main legislation, which is the Income Tax Act? So government has tried to move away from that to then make sure that if there are any incentives, then they need to be included in the main legislation. So that has helped in terms of creating some certainty. But as you may well know, there are bits and pieces that are still not very clear or not very certain. And we've seen time and again amendments being made. In the Income Tax Act, there was a specific legislation introduced just for the extractives to cater for the mining, as well as cater for the petroleum. So that helps in creating some certainty. Then, as you may well be aware, we've also gotten the new Mining Act. So that also helps in creating some certainty. But that does not mean each and everything has been resolved. But at least now there is a good starting point compared to where we were 10 years ago.
Thank you so much, Trevor. Thank you so much. I want to turn now to Daniel. Daniel, you manage a law firm that has a footprint in several jurisdictions on the continent. And just from your perspective as a legal professional, what are some of the challenges that you encounter in assisting multinational clients?
Thank you so much, Brian. Of course, I mean, there is quite a lot of development towards pushing the markets to be one in terms of the AFCFTA and the EU. And there is a growing perception that and design that whatever happens elsewhere should be the same as what is happening on the African continent. But what we observe is that as most of the multinationals keep coming into Africa, at times most of their perception is that these markets could be the same, but to the contrary, most of the markets are extremely different. What happens in Uganda is extremely different from what happens in Congo, and what happens in South Africa, and what happens in Zambia. So the growing need to have a law firm that has extended reach in terms of understanding the specific needs of those jurisdictions becomes extremely key. Time and again, we are seeing a number of multinational clients getting into the continent and giving instructions to one entity to advise in Ghana, in South Africa, in Asia, in Morocco, in Egypt. So for us as practitioners, it's one of the things that we need to consider in having an extended reach to be able to advise our clients beyond the specific jurisdictions where we serve in light of the qualifications that we have. The second thing that we've observed is that even as you are entering these markets, because the markets are peculiar, there is, growing need to do high-level due diligence in the various markets that you're entering. The risks for every jurisdictions are different. The laws are also different. Africa, the perception that is out there for the investors is that there is high political risk. The risk in itself is something that we lawyers need to convince the multinational companies on how best we'll be able to address issues of corruption, issues of transparency, and over time they keep on asking, how are we going to deal with this? The other issues that we observe is because of a number of changes of the laws that keep happening in the various jurisdictions, law firms are required to have enormous knowledge in the changes within the laws. In fact, investors keep asking, in Africa, while regime changes may not be an issue because in so many of our markets, especially in this part of the world, regimes don't change, but the issues of the policies, if one official leaves an entity, the perception they have is that the policies keep changing with individuals. So you have to advise them how best can you manage to maneuver in a situations where the investor is going to put in lots of investment in the country, but is guaranteed that these investments that is putting in are not going to be affected by the changes in the policies that the country has made. The other thing that we see is the attitudes and the cultures. When most of the people who come from the western bit of the country, and even those that come from Asia, and the companies that get in, their work ethic is slightly different from what happens in this part of the market. The time zones are different. The demands on deliveries are extremely different. So the requirement that you're able as a practitioner to work beyond the 8 to 5 are very normal, extremely normal. We keep doing transactions where, if you're doing a transaction with someone in Tokyo or in Japan and you're in Uganda, you may be spending the entire night working. So, some of those requirements are expected of us as practitioners, and even the level of the standards and the skills, because some of the transactions that keep coming in require a multiplicity of skills, from lawyers to the tax guys of PwC, to the engineers. And as you're doing the due diligence, the client is actually interested that you provide much more than just offering a legal opinion based on the law. So we are more and more required to look at ourselves, we lawyers, as, first of all, not as competitors, but colleagues who can work together to provide the best for our clients, but then also to work with our colleagues like the PwCs, like the financial institutions, like KCB, to be able to give the output that the client desires. Something else that we've observed is the lawyer's ability to appreciate the industries and the sectors. Because you see a multinational comes in and, for instance, is into maybe data protection. And as a firm, they expect you to understand their industry, in fact, much better than them. So you really need to up the skills in terms of your capacity as a law firm to continuously appreciate the trends that are happening. Because the FCFT is around, markets are one globally, the rise of the technology is it's disrupting almost the markets to make it possible for you to do transactions real time with someone who is in New York, but it's important for you to appreciate the trends that are happening in the EU in terms of the laws that are changing vis-a-vis the local context that are happening, but also being with the capacity to advise your client at his same knowledge from a similar knowledge point of view. And I think those are some of the things that we've observed, at least as AB and David.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I'm told Michael is now on, and I'm going to get to you in a second, Michael. But Daniel mentioned something that I think requires further probing. You talked about the need for extended reach of legal professionals for them to properly assist multinationals. But we know, in East Africa, for instance, we have the Common Market Protocol that allows movement of goods and services. But that protocol also requires that for there to be cross-border practice, effectively, states have to come up with MRAs, mutual recognition agreements. But there's been a lot of reluctance on the parts of, East African states to come up with those MRAs that allow for cross-border legal practice. I'm just a bit of curious, why is there such a reluctance for people across the continent, to allow movement of legal services across borders? I imagine that would make it easier to help multinational clients.
Brian, the private sector usually moves faster than the government sector. The questions you're asking of the mutual recognition agreements are issues of regulation, which involves, at least for the legal professionals, as well as the auditors, it requires the government and the regulators to be alive to what is happening. In fact, I do know that the East African protocols do allow movement of services across board, but that cannot be practical if the regulators are not alive to the fact that the markets are actually changing. From a day-to-day point of view, and we were having a discussion with my colleagues at KCB on, for instance, the wealth that so many people are getting out of DRC. But you see, even Sudan, most of the practitioners in those markets were actually are lawyers here. Some of them are even members of the Uganda Law Society because they have studied here, they have gotten the qualifications from here. And the client does not know some of the restrictions that we have, does not know that a lawyer has limited jurisdiction to only operate in Uganda. When he gives you an instruction, he assumes that you must have the capacity to actually advise him across board. So I do believe that with the advance of technology and the market itself, it's very important for the regulators to look at this in detail. I do know for a fact that there are concerns, just like about 2-3 months ago, there was a debate in Nigeria, for those who followed. The ministers in Nigeria, the Minister of Trade in Nigeria and the Minister of the UK signed an agreement where they were allowing professionals in the UK to have the capacity to practice in Nigeria, and it had a big discussion on whether it would actually leave the local players in Nigeria with any business. But the key thing is that when you look at the market as it is, at least from where we stand as AB and David, is that unless we ourselves up the game and have the skills that are needed, even the business that we are doing locally on the market is actually being taken over by the foreign players. So it's extremely important that we develop the capacities that we have so that even when the markets are open, we have the capacity to actually deliver and compete. AB and David, we did win the 2021 Africa Law Firm of the Year, and it was competed for by almost all the big players, including the Hogan Lovells and the others. So it's possible for lawyers on the African continent to actually have the capacity to advise on the transactions that are around. So I don't think we should look at it from a threat point of view, but we should look at it from a point of allowing all of us to have the opportunities that are available out there.
Oh, thank you, Daniel. And I just want to get to Michael right from where Daniel stopped. Michael, it's so good to have you on the call. As introduced earlier, Michael Apalbila is part of the Africa Trade and Practice Group of AB and David Africa. Michael, I know that AB and David Africa has such an impressive portfolio of multinational clients that it advises. And I'm just curious to get your experience in dealing with multinationals in terms of the challenges that you have encountered. Daniel just mentioned here that AB and David Africa won a couple of years ago the Africa Law Firm of the Year. And I've heard in the corridors somewhere that multinationals are very sensitive about the capacity of local business advisors in terms of their capacity to give comprehensive and premium advice. What would you say are some of the challenges that you have found in working with multinational companies? Is capacity one of them?
Thank you very much. I'd like to apologize for joining in late. I had some technical challenges. I hope I can be heard.
You can be heard, Michael.
So wonderful. So since I joined, I heard Daniel saying a few things, and I totally agree with those. The things he said are very important for dealing with multinational clients. But then, to answer your question, I would say that the challenges that are faced in my practice in assisting clients across the continent is that can be broken into two main categories. The first, I would say, is the challenges with the system, and the second are challenges with dealing with other law firms. You will realize that oftentimes when multinationals are coming into Africa, they don't want advice only in one country. They want advice in several countries at the same time. And you realize that there are issues with say, the law that is practiced. Africa has over 50, about 54, 55 to 6 countries, depending on how your political ideologies are. And there are about 4 or 5 different forms of law or legal systems that are in practice. So a lawyer has to be abreast with all these legal systems. And unfortunately for us as lawyers, our training is jurisdiction based. So there is a possibility for a lawyer to have that myopia of just looking inward into their own jurisdiction. So we have to cure ourselves of that and have a global overview before we can work for multinational clients. I will also say that there are issues with language. The law is powered by language. We are able to communicate the law with language, and in fact, a little mistranslation can cost a lot of money for a client. So the lawyers have to constantly work with translators or improve their ability in second or third languages so as to be able to work with clients. You realize that the AU has recognized about I think about six languages at my last count, and these languages are official languages, and the business in various countries are transacted in those languages. So language is also very important. Then comes the issue of the fragmented markets. Even though we are one continent, we operate different systems with regards to the market because of the colonial heritage and the vestiges of it. So you realize that even here in Ghana, our neighbors are francophone and they operate a totally different system. If you are dealing with, you're advising a client who wants to be established, let's say the payment system space in Ghana, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Burkina Faso, in Niger, you realize that the systems, the legislative regimes in Ghana are totally different. They tilt towards the Anglophone, the common law system. Once you go to Cote d'Ivoire, you go to Niger, you go to Burkina Faso, you realize that it's tilting towards another legal system. So those nuances must be learned quickly. So these are some of the challenges I would say I would allocate to the system. But then working with other lawyers can also be quite a challenge, a daunting task. I realized that Daniel mentioned it in his speech, in his presentation, because you realize that the response times In fact, a recent study showed that the number one reason why lawyers lose clients is lack of response or poor responsiveness. Uh, you could send an email to a colleague in let's say Mali, and your email will be acknowledged after a week, and that's very difficult. That's very difficult because then you don't know what to go back to the client with, and like Daniel was saying, multinational practice needs a lot of collaboration, because one is able to work in their jurisdiction, but then you need to provide advice in various jurisdictions. So you need boots and heels on the ground as it were. So this is also something that is very challenging. And finally, with regards to this time zone issue, this responsiveness issue is the issue of time zones. I think Daniel acknowledged, touched on that in his presentation as well. We must acknowledge that the people we are working for operate in different time zones. So while it may be night on this side of the globe, it's day on that side. So um, there are times that you may have to rework your schedule, your itinerary, so that you can serve them better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much. And I just want to pick up on something that you mentioned. You talked about our fragmented market on the continent. You also talked about collaboration that is needed to meet the needs of MNCs. You know, and I couldn't help but think about the fragmented needs of multinational companies. We have, for instance, on our panel today, we have somebody from the accounting world, we have lawyers, we have somebody from finance. And I wanted to turn to Trevor and just ask you, Trevor, bearing in mind the various needs that multinational clients have, it's tax advisory, dispute resolution, accounting, and everything else. Do you think that there is room for collaboration between different business advisory industries, the accountants and the lawyers, for us to move in a direction where we can give more and better support to MNCs? There's actually been complaint that organizations like PwC and Deloitte, the big four, are now beginning to do what lawyers do. They're hiring lawyers and...
Well, Brian, you caught me out. Yes, we're hiring lawyers, and there are colleagues who are lawyers that we work with. And where does it come from? Because it speaks to what David has been saying here. Because once a client walks in, you find that there are multiplicity of needs that they have. So first of all, you look inward. So what can you offer? So for example, from a PwC perspective, we have an in-house legal team that could provide in-house legal services. Then you would have, say, tax advisors, who would be us. Then you have the auditors who are doing the assurance. Then you have a team that does, risk and consulting in technology and all those other things. So business has changed, and so have we. So you find, but having provided all that boutique of offering, you still find you don't have everything. So that's when now you need to go to David and tell him, okay, for this specific area, from a legal perspective, I would need your advice because you have more expertise than me on this. Then we've worked with a couple of bankers for a couple of transactions that have been in the market, where the bankers are investment advisors. Then us as a firm, we are either the accounting advisors on the IPO or the tax advisors on the IPO. So we find that us as professionals, we really have to work together to bring value to the client. So if whatever you can't do, then it's out of interactions like this that then you get to know, okay, this is this person's specialty, this legal firm does this and that. Then you're able to refer work to them, especially there are things that we can't do. And there are some assignments that are really big. And if you're not going to, especially if the client wants in-country expertise, then you're not going to go to South Africa or Ghana to get people to do it, then you need to look inward. So there is a lot of merit in working together as professionals.
Thank you, Trevor. That's a good point you make on complementarity. We should think more in that direction, as complementing each other rather than rivaling each other. Ramla, I want to get to you. We hinted here about the AfCFTA and the large market he has opened up for business across the continent. I believe the GDP of Africa, of all the 54 states combined, is in trillions of dollars. But I know that for ordinary business people in Uganda, they face real challenges of trying to benefit from the AfCFTA. I want to scale my business. If I want to export to Ghana, I have to scale my business. I need financing. I need capital. First of all, where do you see an organization like yours, KCB, coming in to help people exploit those opportunities that liberalized and globalized economy presents?
Thanks, Brian. And maybe even before I answer the question, just to speak
Please.
to what Trevor just spoke to. The issue of partnership is very, very critical. And I think banks is, the financial industry, it's one of the things we've mastered. We know what we are good at is, managing money and investments. And we always ensure that we've got panels of lawyers, panels of tax auditors, panels of all sorts of different advisors, because at the end of the day, these clients, these MNCs, when they do come in, they have, different types of contracts and all that. So you need people to be able to support you, to interpret, to understand some of those things. So, we're very big on that, and we really encourage that even for our customers, that when you are coming into, when you're thinking about expansion, always have, look at an entity that, or a banking institution that is also going to be able to support you with all those other, nitty-gritties. Yeah. So in terms of how are we supporting our customers to explore those opportunities now? I mentioned earlier that we are in 7 countries. So one of the things that we're really trying to do now is how do we enable them actually find markets in those countries where we are present. Yeah. One of the things that we've managed to do is, have a platform that allows movement of money across, the different borders, because we have a single platform. So and today's customer, MNC is actually looking for a bank that is not just going to keep their money or provide for them financing, but also how are you actually supporting me to access a market, say in Ethiopia? How are you helping me move money from South Sudan to here? How are you helping me actually find things like hard currency? One of the challenges I forgot to mention is, all around us in the East African region is, there's a challenge around the hard currency in, some of the countries. South Sudan, we're seeing it in Burundi, we're seeing a bit of it in Rwanda. Kenya had that last year. I mean, there's a bit of stability now, but that's one of the things. Then we ensure that how do we, make sure that our customers are able to have that availability of the hard currency to actually support them trade, bring in goods, but also be able to pay their suppliers across, the different continents. Or if I'm a customer across, how do I actually make sure that I make the payment to the MNC in the country that it's located in? So those platforms we are quite big on that. So again, the whole digital transformation, I see that also as a really major trend for us to be able to support our customers in that space. We have come up with products that allow for things like distributor financing, because the distributors could be in different jurisdictions. So again, just understanding the entire ecosystem of the MNC. Who do they deal with? Where do they get their product from? What other markets are they in? And then we ensure that, we provide, so sort of a linear product range for them. And I think also centralization, I can't remember which panelist mentioned it, but today when an MNC approaches us and they are, say, in 7 markets where we are present, they don't want to go and talk to all the 7 markets, right? So they want to speak to one individual who is able then to link them to the rest of the 7 players. So we've been very deliberate on that. So we have a centralized operation in terms of how we manage those regional corporates, which is where I basically sit, and that just allows us to enable them coordinate certain things. Yeah, I want to be able to get a law firm that is in this country, then we quickly arrange that for them through our subsidiary. Yeah, so those are some of the things that we're supporting our clients with.
Thank you, Ramla. You almost preempted my next question for you, which was really where you see the future of the banking industry going.
Yeah.
I know you've already talked a bit about some of how you're thinking forward in terms of helping MNCs, but if you could speak more broadly about where you see the future of the banking industry going in a more globalized, and as some people call it, a more Africanized economy.
Okay, I think something that's become quite big now is this whole ESG conversation, yeah, the environmental and social governance aspect. And I see, the banking industry now also becoming very keen on that. Not just, in the past, you deal with different kind of companies, you finance their projects, but now taking a keen look at their impact, their impact on the environment, their impact on the social economic environment of that specific nation is critical. I mean, if you recall when we were trying to start out our project, the ECOP, there was a lot of matching that was happening, not even here, but elsewhere. And I mean, it almost stalled the project. But that goes to show you that, again, for entities, the MNCs and the financial institutions, we also have to be very keen on how do we actually help our customers start to comply with some of those regulations, yeah? How do we, help them set up the structures? How do we create that sort of visibility for them as they, as they go out to do their business, that to show them that, look, this is now a critical thing. Even when you're looking for funding today from any bank, there are things from an environmental perspective that we might not even be able to touch, right? Unless you are willing to comply with some of those regulations. So that's a trend that I see is becoming quite big in the financial industry. I talked about the digital transformation with this, movement of money across borders. It's becoming, and you have things like Bitcoin, which are not very active here, but in other markets, I mean, this is live, and it's being used. So I think I see that as well starting to come up. Probably not the Bitcoin, but definitely more and more digital transformation around payments. How do we ease, movement of money across the borders? How do we get, more of financial inclusion? So, Kenya is a great case study in terms of mobile money. You now have people coming in from Europe trying to understand how that's being done, because unfortunately for those markets, they were using more of like credit cards. Today in the East African region, I think mobile money trumps credit card usage. Credit card usage is still extremely low. So that is also taking quite a bit of shape. And what the banks, the financial industry is also really trying to do is partnerships, because we do realize that we're not able to do some of those digital transformations or those changes by internally. So more and more partnerships with fintechs who are really good at it, who can be able to convert some of the ideas way faster than the banks. So we're seeing more and more partnerships. At KCB today, we've got a partnership with MTN, for example, that has really supported in terms of digital penetration in a space of about 11 months. When we rolled out the product called Mopesa, we got on board 1.4 million customers. Yeah, so I mean, that with just physical structures could not have been done. Which then looks into the space of things like the financial inclusion. Again, it's a key area that the financial industry is also really looking at. How do we make sure that everybody is at least somewhere in the system. And that really comes from those digital products, those micro loans that people can be able to get on their phones. A lady somewhere in Kabale today, wanting to trade her tomatoes or buy some product, today is able to access a loan at 100,000 shillings based on her behavior on her telephone, which in the old traditional way of banking, that would not be possible. I think the other trend that we see taking shape are from a human capital side as well. We're seeing a bit of hybrid. I mean, a lot of people are trying to go back to the office, but I don't think we're ever going to be able to achieve that fully, because you realize for some kind of organization, it's really cost saving, right? You have there are people who might not need to physically be in an office to get their work done. IT space, fintechs, and now when we're talking about the whole global, glocalization, so people can actually be able to work, in the home space. So I think that's a change that we'll also have to see ourselves put into our structures. I think the other, of course, with the whole digital transformation, it's one thing to try and push the markets into changing the way they do business from cash to more non-cash transactions, but it comes with risks, cyber risks. So again, from a financial space, those are areas that financial institutions have got to be very, very keen on, tighten their policies around that, be able to have good risk management frameworks to not be reactive but proactive ways of actually managing those cyber attacks. I think, was it a month ago, we saw something with Microsoft, and all of us, you couldn't send a basic email, but those are things that we see taking shape as we go along. Of course, data protection, very, very critical. I had a question for the previous panel, but in terms of, data protection, because when they talked about now the ability to actually share information across borders when, the tax bodies want to know more about an entity. But one of the things we hear from the entities that we're banking is, hey, on what basis are you sharing my information? So there's that thin line there as well of how do we then protect that data, but at the same time comply with the regulations of the land. Yeah. So I think those are some of the trends. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ramla. But you mentioned the ESG trend.
Yes.
That's quite an interesting one. Yeah. I know that there's a lot of pressure on financial institutions in the global West to care a lot about who they lend their money to.
Yes.
Lend to green causes and the like. That's why we've been seeing the ECOP.
Yes.
Stop ECOP riots. Are we seeing the same pressure on financial institutions here on the continent? Is there a lot of pressure on financial institutions to consider those ESG concerns at the same rate at which in the global West it's happening? And are we ready as a continent to move rapidly in that direction?
I think yes, it's really starting to take shape. One, even our regulator, when we look at the regulator, locally as well, the central bank is quite keen on this now. Yeah, you have financial institutions actually being asked to disclose this in their financial statements at the end of the year. I mean, as KCB Group, last week we actually did release our ESG report for 2023, giving the full breakdown of, what is it that we've been able to do in terms of financial inclusion, from a green lending perspective. I mean, 15% of our loans as a group now are green loans. So I believe it's starting to really take shape. We're seeing more and more organizations actually publish their ESG, reports. We're seeing more organizations change the way from a governance perspective, their boards look like. Today, boards don't look like, the old boards. Yeah, okay. You don't have a lot of gray-haired people. So there's a lot of inclusion from an age, gender perspective, and we're seeing more and more organizations taking that, not even just the banks. I think even the MNCs are actually driving that, right? And so I think one of the things that we've got to do as financial institutions and other sectors is the sensitization, right? Because if if we don't have compliance for some of those things, people will be left out. Yeah, you'll be left out of the debt market. Okay, but again, it's not just to push, but it's to bring an understanding as to why is this important. Yeah, and for me, I think one of the things I even liked with the whole stop ECOP and everything there was a lot of due diligence that had been done. There was a lot of environmental governance that had been done, but it's because people had not read. There was no sensitization about it. So when now that information was starting to come out, then all of a sudden the noise started to die out. So a lot of sensitization, a lot of guidance in terms of why is this important, and again the visibility that organizations have to be able to publish those reports. What is it that you've actually been able to do? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ramla. Thank you so much. Michael, I want to turn to you now. We've just been discussing about, with Ramla a few seconds ago about the attitudes that are prevalent right now in the global economy. And MNCs, take these concerns very seriously, things like ESG. And I imagine as business advisory professionals, you also have to care about what the MNCs care about. And I just wanted to put it to you, Michael. What are some of the best practices you would advise for people who are advising MNCs to put in place, in order for them to be best positioned to deal with these MNCs, to cater for their needs? What would you say to that, Michael?
Yes, so I think it's a very interesting point that Ramya makes. You must care about what your clients care about. It enables the conversation to go on smoothly. So one of the things that lawyers who work with multinationals must make it a point or become a habit is staying on top of regional and global issues. My senior partner, David Opositote, would say that to the young lawyers that he is not going to let a young lawyer in a room with a client and go. And he says as a joke because he wants to be sure that you can have intelligent conversations with the client. Clients are funny. They enter a boardroom with you and they have like little chit chat. And these things are to find out whether this lawyer I'm having a chat with is knowledgeable. Does this lawyer understand global issues? Does this lawyer understand geopolitics? Does this lawyer understand global trends? So if you were to walk into a meeting and a client says ESG and you have no idea what that means, the chances that you are going to lose that client are very, very, very high. So that is point number one. Make sure you're on top of global issues, trends. ESG is trending now. You should be very familiar with it. The AI, the issues that are coming around that subject of artificial intelligence, you must know them and you must have them at the fingertips. I mentioned responsiveness before, and I think it's very important. Responsiveness, email courtesy. When an email comes in, the fact that you acknowledge immediately and then make yourself accountable. Give the client an idea of when to expect. Clients have excuse doing that because you know you are going to have to deal with some regulators along the line. Not all the information is from you, so you don't want to promise and fail. But it is better to promise and come back and ask for an extension than to stay silent because when you interact with clients, when a lawyer stays silent, they are not sure whether the lawyer one has received the email or whether the lawyer wants to do the work or not. I mean, they go away with a lot of uncertainty. So responding promptly is very important. And then making yourself accountable for the work you are doing. Set timelines for yourself. Share those timelines with the client so that the client is able to track the quality of the work. I would also say that it is very important to build a very good network. Build a network of professionals, of lawyers, of auditors, of regulators, so that information can flow easily. I think Trevor mentioned that although they have a legal department, There are times they are not able to do the work alone. At ABN, we've done a lot of work with the Big Four. We know the Big Four have their own legal department and all that, but because they understand the expertise we have in our various practice areas, and the fact that we have a regional reach, we are able to bring value to them. So we collaborate and then we do a lot of work. I will also say that while you keep an eye on what's happening regionally and globally, you should understand the local terrain. You should understand, you should know your turf as a lawyer. If a client was just to bump into you, send an email and say, I want to set up in Ghana, you should be able to tell the client the various vehicles that you can set up, the time that is needed for them to set up. If you want to export the various documents that they will need to do the export, and then the timeline, it helps them to plan. I've realized something with lawyers that sometimes lawyers fail to appreciate that when a client comes to you for legal advice, that is part of a very big transaction. It's part of a bigger transaction. The legal advice probably is needed at the pre-contractual stages. Maybe you have to do your due diligence. You have to advise on labor law. You have to advise on certain aspects. Then prepare the documentation. Once the documents are signed, then we hand over to management consultants, to auditors, to accountants. They then to HR experts. They then take over. So if the client is not sure how long it's going to take with the lawyer, it delays their other timelines and it affects them. And the last point I will make is that clients, multinational clients, look at the world in regions. They look at the world in regions. If you look at their organogram, they usually divide the globe into various regions. So a lawyer in a particular region, so for example, if you are in Ghana, you should be very conversant with the ECOWAS area. You should be very conversant with Africa because when they are talking to you, they will expect you to be able to give some information about the region in which you operate. Sometimes clients come to Ghana, for example, because they want to use Ghana as a hub to export into West Africa. They may go to Uganda because they want to use it as a hub to export to neighboring countries. So you must be able to give the advice in those areas. And I think finally is the fact that lawyers have to be proactive because in order to be very agile and to provide the information that is needed, you have to be proactive. We should not stick only to the law. We must be commercially minded. Look at such what what everything means in terms of commercials, like to a client. What your advice will mean commercially? Will it mean that they will have to delay the process? What will that translate in terms of tax? What will that translate in terms of project management? What will that translate in terms of the bottom line? So we have to come out of our shell, as it were, where we only look at things from the legal perspective, but then we should look at the end of the client, which is to make profit, and see how our advice and our work will affect that. Thank you.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you so much, Michael. I think we're coming to the end of our discussion. This is supposed to last just an hour, and it's been profound insights. But before, I'm going to give all the panelists a moment to just freestyle their final thoughts and give their general observations and closing remarks. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. You know, I'm reminded of the story of the man who took his mule to the Kentucky Derby. If you're wondering what the Kentucky Derby is, it is the most famous horse race competition in the world. He was asked, "Do you expect your mule to win?" He said, "No, but look at the company that my mule will be in." So it's been amazing being in your company and in the company of our great panelists. And so now I'll give each one of them a moment to give their final remarks. And I think we'll start with Michael. Michael, please take it away.
So, I would say that the AFCFTA has given Africa a very big opportunity, and lawyers have to be at the forefront of this, where we don't have to see ourselves as competitors. We have to collaborate because there's so much value, there's so much work that must be done to ensure that the benefits this trade agreement come forth, or even not necessarily in the trade agreement, of the potential of Africa is fully maximized. And not only as lawyers and other professionals. And we must come together as professionals to help the entrepreneurial energies of Africa to actually rise to the occasion and maximize its potential. Because if we are able to do that, Africa will be the shining continent that the whole world will have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much. A hand clap for Michael. Ramla, I think I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Brian, and I should say I'm a mule as well. I've learned so much just by being here. Yeah, so I think, one of the things Michael has mentioned is in terms of the rich opportunity for Africa right now. And I mean, we are seeing so many entities now, getting into the African continent. It's not by mistake. It's because of the opportunities that we really have there. And I think mine is that, local banks, local law firms, whatever service providers may be in these markets, we shouldn't lose out on those opportunities, right? Someone mentioned that MNCs, one of the things they really worry about is trust of dealing with local service providers that they've found in those markets. So I think ours is to really equip ourselves, use data. We shouldn't shy away from things like AI, because these really just help us to pick up on data, to understand the customers, to understand the markets, and elevate ourselves from a relationship management perspective, customer service, better operational efficiency. So there is an opportunity in terms of, investments coming in, but there is an opportunity for the locals to also be able to tap into that. But it's the readiness, right? It could be individuals. Many people worry about the AIs because they think they'll be out of employment. And it's true, you get out of employment if you're not ready. But at the end of the day, machines don't work by themselves. They need people. So let's equip ourselves. Let's read. Let's get information about what's happening, so that as we engage with customers, we are ready. Yeah, they don't find us, shallow. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ramla. A round of applause for Ramla. Wow, fantastic. Over to you now, Daniel.
Thank you, Brian. Mine is that the rise of AI, which my colleagues have spoken about, and now generative AI and live streaming, of course, is driving digital change and investments in technology and the underlying digital infrastructure. So lawyers must unlearn, but also pay new attention to how tech can improve our practice in light of the rapidly changing environment that we're working in. Of course, in this new era, it's important for us to continuously look at the trends, but also tap into the opportunity, and also advise our clients on the existing opportunities that come with technology. Something else that I could advise is the ESG concerns require us, especially for those that are advising in finance and banking, to look at the collaborations that we can have. There are quite a number of players that are looking at, for instance, like now the Pan-African payment platform of the Afro-Exim Bank, which is looking at collaborating with players within the finance and the banking industry as a way of tapping into the unbanked, but also part of financial inclusion. The likes of the MasterCards are looking at how they can drive financial inclusion on the bottom pyramid of the sector. So how can we as lawyers continuously create these opportunities for our clients? Because the clients are no longer looking at us from the point of going to court and just offering opinions from the comfort of our offices. They're actually looking at the opportunities that we as lawyers can create for them in light of the big opportunities that are prevalent on the African continent.
Wow, thank you, Daniel. A hand for Daniel, round of applause. Thank you so much, Daniel. And now finally, Trevor, over to you.
Thank you, Brian and fellow panelists. So for me, it's really two things. One, when we talk about multinationals, because quite often we think about people who are bringing in capital, which is the inbound. But yes, that is good, and Uganda attracts a lot of capital. But quite often we forget that there are indigenous businesses that are growing into the rest of Africa, the rest of the region. And there are good examples. You can, look at roofings, look at these guys who are doing the beauty care and all. There's the company that's into cosmetics and all. So having a very big distributorship, Movit, yes.
Movit.
So what we need to do again is to, yes, there is good merit in looking after the multinationals that come in, but then you also need to look at the Ugandan companies that are also growing and expanding. It's easier. Why? Because then you have an easier local discussion. And if you position yourself to be the lawyer, to be the advisor who's going to be working with that company, trust me, they will always be looking after you. So to me, yes, they're all the multinationals, but then also we shouldn't forget they're the local companies. When you look at some of these companies, Bolloré is a family company, but they are now here. So, and even the people who bought them, AGL, it's a family company. So there is a lot of merit in also looking at the local companies that are expanding. Then for both the inbound and outbound transactions that are made or capital that's invested in Uganda, we're just having a little chit chat here with Daniel. I think what we need to do as professionals is to just make sure we show up. If it's an email, we just got to be responsive in order to service these clients. Thank you.
Wow. Round of applause for Trevor. And I should say actually that Trevor read my mind. As the panelists were giving their final remarks, it just crossed my mind about, local businesses growing into MNCs. I know CJ's is a chain now, we've gone into Kenya, he mentioned Movit, lots of other local, African companies that have the potential to grow. And I'm so glad that Trevor mentioned that in his closing remarks. So once again, friends, it's been an absolute pleasure having you all join us. We started a little bit of late. Well, not a little bit, quite actually late. But we've come to the end, and we are glad that you joined us and you persevered. And I'm sure you benefited from this. So the discussion is closed, and thank you for joining us. Round of applause once again to Ramla Nantongo, Michael Apalbila, Daniel Lubogo, and Trevor Lukanga. And myself, Brian Collins Ochen.